Bonsoir et bienvenue de la part de AFUSA. My name is Renee Ketchum. I'm president of the Alliance Française of Greenwich, Connecticut, and board member of the Fédération des Alliances Françaises au USA. And I'm thrilled to welcome all of you tonight to enjoy the happy hour with the Lafayette Escadrille. If you are not all ready with your cognac and champagne that were in the instructions when you signed up for this, to follow along with our guests the French way with an apéro, aller chercher les ingrédients, or just watch along. Today we welcome filmmakers Darroch Greer and Paul Glenshaw, in addition to Dan Patterson, who will share the forthcoming documentary film, The Lafayette Escadrille. This film is the first ever comprehensive documentary made about the founding squadron of American combat aviation, and one of the great stories about the French-American alliance. It's about courageous aviators who honored what they felt was their debt to France. Do we have some slides, Melissa, about our guests? So here is our first slide. So welcome. Next slide. So please keep yourself on mute. Just a few housekeeping things so this runs as smoothly as possible. Keep your option set to speaker, not gallery. And we'll enable the chat feature for a question and answer period following the presentation, which will be about just a little under an hour, so we have enough time for questions and answers. We're thrilled to have with us tonight Paul Glenshaw, co-director, co-writer, and producer of the Lafayette Escadrille, regular contributor to Air and Space Smithsonian Magazine, drawing instructor and history lecturer for the Smithsonian, as well as Darroch Greer, co-director, co-writer, and producer of the Lafayette Escadrille, award-winning documentary filmmaker, freelance writer, and researcher. And thrilled today to have, in addition, Dan Patterson, who co-producer and art director of the Lafayette Escadrille, photographer, graphic designer, and filmmaker, who's published over 40 books, mostly on aviation history. So enjoy the program. We look forward to your questions in the chat following the presentation. And if you've not had a chance to see the 20-minute short version of the film that was in the invitation, it is available on YouTube, and we will make sure that you're aware of it at the end. So now to Darroch, Paul, and Dan, and pre-doc cocktails.
Thank you, Renee. Welcome, everybody. We thought it expedient to start our happy hour in a bar. This is Harry's New York bar in Paris, France, where we went to film the making of the Lafayette Cocktail. That was Jerry, the bartender, and here we are at 5 Rue Danu, if you've never been there. I forget what arrondissement it is. There's our cinematographer, Matthew Mazza. And so we came into Jerry and we said, Jerry, we'd like you to make the French 75, which was a cocktail named after the big French gun. And I said, it's very simple. It's half champagne and it's half cognac. And he said, well, I can't make that. And I said, well, no, it's very simple. Half champagne, half cognac. He said, I can't make it. That's not the drink. And I said, well, it's right here in Ted Parsons' book. And I reached into my backpack, and on page 101, William Thaw should have had at least one more medal with Luffberry. He was the inventor and chief exponent of that very dynamic concoction known as the Lafayette Cocktail. Ah, there was the problem. Jerry said, oh, I can make that. It was composed of equal parts brandy and champagne. The soothing mixture with the kick of a mule brought him and many another good man down where the Boche failed. So without further ado, and I recommend pouring in the cognac first. And I also recommend not making it half cognac or half champagne because it's quite a potent mixture. So, 2 fingers of cognac. And maybe we can all pop a bottle at the very same time. There's Jerry's steady hand with the cognac and champagne. There we are. Ah. I'd like to raise a toast to the Alliance Française, of which I've been a member, to the memory of the Lafayette Escadrille, and to continued French and American amity. Santé.
Santé.
So we started this documentary 4.5, maybe almost 5 years ago now. And we luckily got a grant from the Florence Gould Foundation, which allowed the three of us to fly to Paris just in time for the rededication of the Lafayette Escadrille Memorial, of which General McPeak played a very major role, which we will hear about. So this is the day before the event on April 15th,
19th.
It was the 18th was the memorial. So this is the day before. We spent a day shooting the fountain and the memorial before the big event.
Right. And this is a really amazing moment for all of us. It was the first time that the three of us had actually been in the same place as we worked on this. And it was also the first time that many of these families ever met another. There was people from the same family who had never met, and many of the families who had heard about their ancestors who were the pilots in the Escadrille had never met either. So it was really, it was an emotional moment. It was a beautiful day. We gathered everybody together for this group photograph, and they were all pretty amazed by what was going on. And so actually, so were we. It was all of the preliminary work that we had done to set this up, it all happened. And it was a beautiful day. And we were just thrilled with what took place from there has brought us here tonight. So it is a big moment for the three of us and the real beginning of our work.
These are some of the people we interviewed for the film. It was very important for us to get as close a firsthand account as we could of the pilots. So here are descendants of 4 of the main characters in our film. In the upper left is Guillaume de Ramel, and he is the great-grandnephew of Norman Prince. He is in Newport, Rhode Island, and being interviewed in front of a plane in which he built himself. In the upper right is Carolyn Bridgman Reese, and she is the daughter of Ray Bridgman, who joined the last year of the Escadrille, and a very troubled man all his life. And he was a pacifist, but he still felt it incumbent upon himself to fight for France. He was originally driving an ambulance and felt that wasn't enough. He became a fighter pilot, a squadron leader, and he shot down 4 planes by the end of the war. In the lower left-hand corner is Alexandra Truitt, and she is the great-grandniece of James McConnell, and spoke a great deal about the legacy of McConnell and his death and what it meant for her whole family. And she seems to be the only one that is sort of free of that legacy. And in the lower right-hand corner, we have Nick Rutgers, and he is a great-grandson of James Norman Hall. And his great-grandfather flew in World War I. His grandfather flew in World War II. His father flew in Vietnam. And he is now a squadron commander of the Oregon National Guard up near your neck of the woods, General McPeak, and a really lovely guy. And here we are in France. In the upper left-hand corner, that is Paul to the left. And leaning over in the light blue shirt is General Daniel Bastien, a 4-star Air Force general who's also an amateur historian and helped us a great deal with both photographs and the story, which you'll hear about later. Right below him is Jean-Patrice Lasainte, and he is the commanding officer at Luxeuil-les-Bains, which is an air base that started in 1914 in preparation for the war. And it's also the base where the Lafayette Escadrille was first stationed when they formed in April 1916. Jean-Patrice also spent a good deal of time in Washington and the Maryland area. And we were having dinner together, and I had to listen to him and Paul discuss where the best bagels were in Silver Spring, Maryland, which was pretty funny. In the upper right-hand corner, I am interviewing Michelle and Andre Spetz, and they are other amateur historians about Kiffin Rockwell, and they're standing about 100 yards in front of where Kiffin Rockwell crashed and died. And they have written a children's book about Kiffin Rockwell and his life, and they also gave us a very emotional interview about the end of his life. And below him is Jean-Marc Simon, another amateur historian, and he is in Ham, H-A-M, France, where the Lafayette Escadrille was, they were there for quite a while and really suffered a rough time. There was a month called Bloody April where they lost 4 pilots, all on Mondays, in consecutive Mondays. And he's standing in front of the field in which they flew from, which of course now grows wheat for the fantastic bread that France has. And here is Paul interviewing another French general. This is Yvon Goutte. He is a 2-star brigadier general and also past president of the Lafayette Foundation, which is a group of pilots that have flown in the French Escadrille Lafayette, which is still named after the American squadron and still carries on and flies today. And you'll see a picture of Yvon later on in our presentation.
I will speak briefly about our, the locations that we filmed in. We filmed many of our interviews here in the United States, but it was very important for us to film extensively in France because the story happened there. And especially for our American audiences, to get a sense of place, to have France itself be a character, and the people who we met there who know this story and live it. So again, as Darroch mentioned, there's General Daniel Bastien. And we are standing in the parking lot of a cheese factory in the little town of Corsieux in the Vosges. And it was General Bastien looking at electrical grid maps and topographical maps and street maps of this little village from the period and photographs that he was able to determine that the spot where we're standing is the spot where Norman Prince, where his airplane hit the ground when he crashed. He hit some some high tension wires and crashed after escorting a bombing mission into Germany. And so this is, emblematic of the level of detail that we went to make sure that we could go to as close as we possibly could to where the events that we were depicting actually happened.
Paul, I just wanted to mention that is the President Brie cheese factory. And the general thought, well, if we filmed from the roof, that would be the best angle. And we had to climb a fire escape several stories up with the camera on the tripod. And we got up there and said, no, this actually doesn't work. And climbed back down and shot from the ground.
And so I was working with General Bastien on this location, and he said, well, we'll just go up to the roof. And I thought, that's great. We'll go in the building, we'll go up an elevator, and we're done. And we all marched around the back of the building. And it was a fire escape, yes, but it was a vertical ladder up the side of the building. And Mathieu, our cinematographer, lugging that very expensive camera and shooting me hate rays as I'm meekly crawling up behind him, like, I'm sorry, man, I didn't know this was going to happen. So that's the glamour of documentary filmmaking right there.
Indeed.
This is the production map that we made before we went over. And actually, this is an edited version of it. We shot over 40 locations. Google Earth is a tremendous tool if you're scouting from afar. And we were actually able to pinpoint many of the locations, as General Bastien had done, all over the Western Front. We confined ourselves to the Western Front because of reasons of time and budget. They were trained in the south of France, especially in Pau, and they served all the way from Dunkirk all the way across the Western Front. So from one end to the other. And that was one of the big challenges of this story and condensing it, is it's one of the only stories, if not the only story, of American combat engagement in World War I from the very beginning of the war to the very end. So it's a lot to encompass. So we had to really think carefully about where we were going to go to be able to tell our story well. So to illustrate how we use Google Earth, this is a satellite image of the little village of Bayonne, which sits on a plateau over the small city of Bar-le-Duc in the east.
That's Bayonne in the top right and Bar-le-Duc along the river in the lower left.
Yes. And we are very grateful to the German reconnaissance photographers of the time because, and those who have kept the photographs intact and very clear and made them digitally available, because the German photographs have scale on them very often. And so it's very easy to set the satellite image to the same scale and then bring the reconnaissance photograph in and make sure that the roads all match up and you've got it. So if you can see my cursor, this is a very good example. Look at the loop of the road right here. You'll see, oops, spoiler alert. You'll see that it matches up almost exactly where the road splits, where this road carries on. And it gave us the location of the airfield where the escadrille was really first set into combat when they were flying over the Battle of Verdun. And we can see in the reconnaissance photograph, if you can see my cursor, these are the hangars and other buildings that were associated with the squadron. There's some farm buildings just across the street. Those farm buildings are still there. So we were able to point our drone in the corner of the field. There's a little housing development where some of it was, but right next door is the open field still there. So to get this takeoff shot, when we're talking about them going to fly over the terrible Battle of Verdun, we're flying out of the same field that they did.
I'd just like to ask Paul that those are low resolution, uncolor corrected shots. And we shot as much as we could in 4K resolution. And it really looks great on the big screen.
Yes. In talking to, Dan and Darroch and I were having lunch in a little restaurant there in Bayonne and explaining to the very kind people there what we were doing. And we were hoping to find the house where they lived. All we knew was they were put up in a villa. And so we were sent to the town historian who also owned the local photo shop. And in our very bad broken French and his better but still broken English, we were able to work out that this was the house. The owner wouldn't let us in. It was a bit of a mess inside, but he let us film the outside. So we at least got that. And this is another place, just right around the alley from this, where there was a photograph that had been taken of the escadrille, and we wanted to know where it had been shot. And it was General Bastien looking at the old photograph and using Google Earth figured out where it was and told us where to go. And you can see that the photograph from 1916 pretty much matches up exactly with where we were standing in this alleyway. So wherever we could make those then and now comparisons, we did, again, to bring our audience from the 20th century back into the early 20th century and our audience from the United States back into France.
Do you want to point out some of the characters there, Paul?
Oh, certainly. So on the left of the photograph is Norman Prince looking at the camera. He was one of the founding members of the escadrille. In the center is Charles Nungesser, who was one of the top French aces of the entire war. There was very little of the original Nungesser left by the time this photograph was taken because he'd crashed and been restored so many times. He had a lot of artificial everything in his body. And he was actually recovering from one of his crashes when he came to the escadrille, and to recover, he flew over Verdun with them for about a month. And on the right is Didier Masson, who is one of the French-born members of the escadrille, but who had come to the United States to be a pilot.
I think Nungesser broke his jaw 4 times and all of his teeth were gold.
All of his teeth were gold, yeah. Here we are in the little village of Rodorin, right near the German border. And we are in the park Kiffin Rockwell. This is a nice little municipal park for this little town. It's got a playground and some playing fields. And about 100 yards from this marker is where Kiffin's airplane crashed. And every year there's a little memorial service, or so we were told. It's not a little service. This is it. And I should emphasize that we showed up and filmed what they were already doing. They did not put this on for us, for the cameras. It was a really beautiful ceremony where Veterans of the French military received decorations. Speeches were made about the amity between the United States and France and the sacrifice of the young Americans in World War I. So it's really a beautiful thing. If you notice on the right-hand side of the left-hand side of the picture, you'll see some young people wearing light blue shirts. That is a band, high school band from Michigan that makes a tour of France every summer, and every summer they come and play at this ceremony. So we were hoping we would find some moments that showed how people still remembered, and we got this, just extraordinary. And that is Colonel Lasaint there in his dress uniform, just to the right of the marker. Another picture of the glamour of making documentary films. That is me holding the umbrella to keep the camera dry so that Mathieu can film the cemetery and the ossuary at Verdun. It was in 2016 that Dan and Darroch and I made our first trip there. None of us had ever been to Verdun before, and it was a really, for all of us, I think it was the moment that the depth of the war, certainly for me, I'll speak for myself, that the depth of the war really made itself felt, that I really started to understand the scope and scale of it. And we were quite fortunate that day when we went to film, because it was pouring rain and there was nobody there. And so we got some really beautiful footage of this very solemn place.
We had left 94-degree Paris, and the next day was 54 at Verdun.
And this is a spot outside the little village of Flavy-la-Martelle where there is a stone marker that is very nicely maintained. And on the left is that same spot. This is where one of the original Escadrille pilots, James McConnell, where his airplane fell and where he was buried per his wishes. His body has been removed to the memorial outside Paris. But we went there to film, and it was one of those occasions again where we told nobody we were coming, but the marker and its environment was in perfect shape. I'd like to introduce General Merrill McPeak at this moment to help us tell the story of one of the Escadrille pilots who you saw in the 20-minute film, Raul Luffberry, their top-scoring ace.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Well, Raul Luffberry has been a hero of mine for many years. He's a hero really to all fighter pilots. And by the way, he too is buried in that memorial to the Lafayette Escadrille on the outskirts of Paris. If you get over there, he's probably the most famous one buried in the crypt down below. There are about 50 or so bodies down there, almost all of them American pilots, but also there are 4 French officers. You have to remember that these were all sergeant pilots, including Luffberry, under French officers who commanded the squadron. Anyways, been a hero of mine ever since I went to fighter pilot training. There's a maneuver named after Luffberry, and you all have to learn how to do it when you're a pilot. Most civilians will know something about an aileron roll or a loop, but there's also a maneuver called the Luffberry. It's the only guy I know that has an official maneuver named after him. He was, of course, a very skilled pilot, also a first-rate mechanic, took care of a lot of the maintenance on his own airplane, including the gun maintenance. You know, most of the guys that got in trouble because their guns jammed. But Luffberry was able to keep his going quite often by paying a lot of attention to the gun itself. He ended up, I think, with 17 officially recognized kills, but he had a lot more than that. He often penetrated well behind German lines, and the airplanes he shot down were not witnessed. In those days, nobody believed what fighter pilots say. Now everybody knows we tell nothing but the truth. But in those days, most of the Army didn't believe what the fighter pilots said. So you had to get a signature from somebody on the ground who had actually seen you make that shoot down, And so pilots often landed, they could on grass fields and so forth, and went and found somebody who could say, did you see that? And so they would confirm the kill. Luffberry had 17 confirmed kills and quite a few more, nobody knows how many, I guess, far enough behind enemy lines that he didn't want to land and get somebody to to certify the kill. Later, of course, he was integrated into the Army Air Service when we entered the war, became an officer. I think he ended up as a major, and he actually commanded the 94th Squadron, the so famous squadron, so-called Hat in the Ring Squadron. And in that capacity, Eddie Rickenbacker was his wingman for a while. And Rickenbacker, of course, is officially our leading ace from World War I. But if all of Luffberry's kills had been counted, he would be far and away our leading ace from that engagement. So that's all I have to say about him. I would just add for Paul and Dan and Derek, this is an absolutely wonderful documentary. It reeks with authenticity. I think you can tell that already by the stories of how deep and detailed they went into it. But it's a grand documentary, and really should be seen by everybody with an interest in history or aviation, or even just go see a good documentary. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, General. Paul, if you can go back one more slide. The photograph on the right is of Luffberry in Vietnam, which is pretty interesting back then. This is probably 1912.
12.
And, you know, the fact that General McPeak flew there as well. You can see the those conical hats in the back that some of the villagers are wearing. And the gentleman in the two photographs on the left is Mark Porp. And this was his best friend. They met overseas, and Porp was an exhibition flyer. He's standing in front of a Blériot there, and that's probably a Blériot that he's sitting in the cockpit. And he hired Luffberry as his mechanic, and they went back to France and were preparing another Asian trip when the war broke out. And Mark Porp crashed and died in an accident in December of 1914, and Raul Luffberry blamed the Germans for it, and from then on was determined to kill as many Germans as he could, and he did a lot.
I should add, I guess, that Luffberry's father was American. That's how he, became an American. But I guess his mother was French, and he spoke, that was his native language, was French.
It was. He was. And thank you, General McPeak. And thank you so much for participating tonight and for being in our film. To have yourself in the film, a former Chief of Staff of the Air Force, fighter pilot. That gives our film a lot of great credibility, and we really do appreciate it. Luffberry's father was from Wallingford, Connecticut, and Edward Luffberry, and he was a businessman, and he was doing a lot of business in France, and he married a French woman, and they settled down and started a family, and his mother died, and the father went back to Connecticut and left the boys to be raised by their grandparents. And Luffberry didn't visit Connecticut until 1906. And this is the apartment building in Wallingford, Connecticut that he lived in. He worked in a silver plating factory for 2 years before he went. This was part of his incredible travels around the world before the war. And the sad story is that he was coming to Wallingford to see his father. He was now an adult and hadn't seen his father since he was a child, and came over only to find out when he landed that his father had left for France a week before, and they never saw each other again. And we've actually happened to find just the other day, this is a want ad that Luffberry put in the Wallingford newspaper. And this is how we were able to find out where his apartment building was, because of his address. It's still there. Luffberry, the Escadrille, if you saw the 20-minute film, and certainly in our full film, you know that they famously had two pet lions named Whiskey and Soda, who they kept as mascots. And Luffberry was their favorite, and he was the only one who could take care of Soda, who was a notoriously bratty, mean little lion, but he was very, very close to Whiskey as well. And this is the town of Mahon, where Luffberry died. He was in an engagement with a German in 1918, and the theory is that he was unsecured in his airplane and fell out. And so a marker is there that we filmed. Okay, so Dan and I are going to talk a little bit about collections right now. As we said, we worked really hard on getting to the primary source as much as we could through the family members, but also what the pilots themselves left behind. And we were very fortunate in that so many of them were excellent writers, and their collections are intact, and many of their letters and diaries have already been published, but a lot of them haven't. And we found them. We found 5 collections of material that had never been seen before, and this is one of them. This is the collection of Frederick Prince Jr. He was the brother of Norman Prince, one of the co-founders of the Escadrille. And in 2017, his steamer trunk containing all his World War I stuff was found on French eBay. And the family tracked it down to a rather shady junk shop, French junk shop. And it's a bit of a story about how they kind of strong-armed the guy into paying what they came prepared to pay, but they got the material back. And inside was this incredible trove of photographs, maps, letters, newspaper clippings, and Freddie Prince's diary. So here we see some of the material from this. It wound up in Newport, Rhode Island, and I went up and spent 4 days photographing it. So you see Frederick Prince on the far left, his father and his younger brother, Norman. They came from one of the wealthiest families in the United States, and their father was a very controlling man. On the right, you see 2 formal portraits of Freddie and Norman in their French uniforms. They both pretty much left everything behind in order to serve in the war, very much against their father's wishes. And then Norman was killed in 1916, and Freddie was removed from the service, much against his wishes. And it was finding materials like this. On the right, you see Freddie's diary, which had never been seen, that tells the story of how he was in flight training. He was just finishing up his fighter pilot training, and he got word that his brother had crashed. He was down in Po, and he had to get up to Corsieux on the completely diagonally the other side of France. And he raced across France by train, trying to get to his brother. And this page tells the story of him running up the street in the middle of the night and being met and being told that he didn't make it. And it's just heartbreaking. And so to find this and to have that story told of the death of Norman Prince told by his brother, there's nobody better to tell it. And so in a lot of ways, our job is to simply stand out of the way and let the story be told by those who did it.
Paul, you should mention the letter to the left too.
Oh, the letter to the left is a letter from the Prince brothers' mother to Norman. It took me a while to decipher her handwriting, but it says, "Dear Nimmy." That apparently was his nickname. And she's writing to him about the death of Victor Chapman, who was the first of them to be shot down and killed. And to say that she poured the guilt on with a trowel, or laid it on with a trowel, is an understatement. The parents were absolutely emphatic with their sons that what they were doing was the wrong thing to do, and that they were throwing everything away for a cause that wasn't theirs, and yet they persisted. So it makes the story very human and very real. Dan?
Yeah. Was this 2017, 2018? Paul called me and said,
2017.
Paul called me up and said, you're going to get an email and a phone call from Marcel Rockwell, who's the great grandniece
Yes.
of Kiffin Rockwell. And she has a whole bunch of stuff. She's going to be in Ohio, and she's going to let you have it for a week. And so I heard from Marcel, and I met her at the United States Air Force Museum, which is here in Dayton, where I live. And she produced a valise about that big and said, we found all these things. Some of them they found fairly recently. And in this valise were about 300 photographs, which we had never seen. That all needed to be scanned, which I could happily do, and several wrapped packages of Kiffin Rockwell's effects, things that he'd left behind when he was killed. And she said, take these for a week, and I'll meet you in a week. And so I brought here to my studio and sorted everything out and set up the lights and everything to shoot this, and started to unwrap these packages. And this one particularly, which had a handwritten note on it was like brown craft paper, the contents of Kiffin Rockwell's pockets when he died. Now, wow. And we'd been into this now for several years, and we knew the story. We knew what this was. So all of us feel a serious reverence for these artifacts, and you have to treat them with reverence. And so to unwrap this package and find Kiffin Rockwell's watch, well, that's a pretty personal thing. And then this tortured cigarette case, which was engraved with his name, which was in his pocket when he was shot down and killed, a photograph of his mate, Victor Chapman, who was the first member of the squadron to be killed. The plaid handkerchief at the lower left had bloodstains on it. Even though it had been laundered, it had bloodstains. And what almost got to me the most was this piece of wood, which was a piece of Rockwell's propeller, which was still embedded with French soil in my studio in Dayton, Ohio. And those things just don't happen every day. They don't. And the soil from France for which Rockwell died was right there in that piece of propeller. And it's a pretty emotional thing to hold those things in your hands. And so the responsibility to make quality photographs of these things is sometimes overwhelming. And sometimes you have to stand back and say, all right, it's just another job. Light is light, focus and focus. Don't let me screw this up. And so you go ahead and do it. But this photograph and a couple other things that were he left behind, all of us feel very fortunate to have gotten to do this film and to meet these people and to hold these things, which is essentially a handshake away from Kiffin Rockwell 100 years later. And so that's the attitude we put into making this film. We took this as a monumental responsibility to tell the story and make it compelling. And things like this that you get to put your hands on is the privilege that you get doing these things. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's you finish the job and you say, well, I'm done for the day. I'm quitting. And
Dan, I have a question.
Yeah.
How is the tobacco?
Well, since I don't smoke, I decided not to light one of the cigarettes.
Okay.
Although I joked to Marcel when I returned it that I had smoked a cigarette, and she turned white. But I just, we take this very seriously, and we're incredibly proud of our accomplishment.
A real challenge we had was finding the right planes to photograph. I had done a previous World War I aviation film, and all of the planes we needed from a squadron that flew for 6 months were in one place in New Zealand. And I thought, oh, this will be a snap. We'll be able to run into that again. Not so. The Lafayette Escadrille, they flew for 2.5 years through the war. The planes evolved on the French side and the German side. So here we are above Pennsylvania, And that is our intrepid cinematographer, Mathieu Maza, French-American, shooting a Newport 17 replica, but it's only 7/8 scale Newport 17 because the pilots, two planes that fly these, can take the wings off and shove it into a trailer and drive it all over the country wherever they want to fly. Matthew is seated in a, I guess that's a plane called a Breezy. I don't know why they call it that, but this was the first air-to-air footage that we got for the film. And actually that is one of the planes that Dan painted. For some reason, these two guys who barnstorm all over the place had painted their French Newports in Belgian colors. And I don't know why they did that, but Dan made them French, and thank goodness. Oh, well, here we are, Dan. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, we both these guys said, yeah, we'd be happy to contribute our aircraft to your film, but they're markings. And so the challenge was how to turn them into French airplanes. And they wanted to be able to return them to Belgian markings. So I consulted my dad, a commercial artist who's now 95, still alive, and said, here's the problem. And he said, no sweat. I painted on glass all the time. You use poster paint and you mix dishwashing liquid with it and you can paint on anything. So I was limited to the primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, and white and black. And I repainted these airplanes and turned them into French aircraft. And they survived. They kept them on for quite a while. They finally washed them off and said they came right off with a wet paper towel. I also painted the Indian head on the side of the airplane. And I had to go all the way back to my art school training to mix colors to be able to paint the Indian head properly. And that's a photograph in the hangar. And I had a color print of the original Seminole head for the Lafayette Escadrille. And our cinematographer, Matthew, who's French, the first time we did the air-to-air photographs, here's the same airplane in both French colors and the Belgian colors. But Matthew said when he was shooting air-to-air and he saw the Newport French colors, he got all choked up because he's French, and there they were, flying over the Laurel Highlands of Pennsylvania, standing in for the French countryside. And it worked. And we suddenly had French aircraft, and it was an interesting artistic problem to solve.
So here we are filming planes in France. I think through Facebook, we ran into Eric Kurter, who's a French pilot in the upper left-hand corner with Matthew, and I'm seated behind just along for the ride. And we went up to film the upper right-hand corner, a Newport 28, thank you, that Paul and I had seen the day before flying at an air show on a rainy day in Saint-Dizier. And you said, well, tomorrow I'm going to be flying over Verdun. Why don't you join me? So it was a bit of a trick shooting through the glass cockpit. That was pretty difficult. I hadn't done that before, but we did get some beautiful shots of that plane, which I think served as Raul Luffberry's plane briefly and James Norman Hall's plane briefly.
Yep.
Down in the lower right-hand corner is the air show at Saint-Dizier, and one of the pilots of the Patrie de France, which are the equivalent of the Blue Angels and the whatever the Air Force flies in that formation. But Paul is speaking to a pilot, Hervé, that by chance he had met a year earlier at the French Embassy in Washington, D.C., because the Patrie had done a commemorative flight across America. And so, it was like meeting an old friend. And the other handsome pilot that we met in the lower left-hand corner, this is back in Luxeuil, the place where the Lafayette Escadrille originally flew from. And he is standing in front of his Mirage jet that is painted in the colors of Georges Guinemer, who was until he died, the greatest French ace in World War I. And he called his plane Old Charles, and he was a member of the Insignia squadron, and that's a stork that you see on the back tail of the plane. And again, Matthew, Paul, and myself. However, we could not find a Newport and an Eindecker to fly together. And
Darroch, let me just stop you there. So the Eindecker was the German fighter that the Escadrille first flew against. And there is one full-scale flying Eindecker in the world that is exactly as we wanted. And it was in Australia, and it was not flying. So we were up against it because we had to show the Newport and the Eindecker in order to establish them becoming fighter pilots.
yeah, it was very key for the death of Victor Chapman, the death of Kiffin Rockwell. Very important. I had a friend who passed away in California, and perhaps the best collection of World War I planes ever, and we shot them on the ground. And he had a beautiful yellow Eindecker, which we shot on the ground. But all of a sudden I discovered, or actually in the 11th hour when we had to finish the film, we met the Long Island Skyhawks, and they fly nothing smaller than quarter scale model airplanes or third scale model airplanes. And they had a yellow Eindecker, which you can see right there in the middle of the photograph. And so I went out to Long Island with another cinematographer, a great guy, Joe Friedman. And we filmed these guys for 2 days, and they were fantastic. And their models are beautiful. The second plane in from the right is a German Albatross that's quarter scale, and it's actually all made of wood. And you really can't tell the difference, I have to say. Paul said he's spoken to a number of people that have seen the film and asked them if they noticed the model shots, and knock on wood, so far no one has really noticed.
So far, we're batting 1,000. So far, we're doing all right.
Yeah, but that's what it took. There they are.
The trick is to ask them after they've seen the movie, not before. So they're not looking for it. So I will wrap us up, and we'll be able to take some questions. Actually, let me throw it to Dan just to talk about our first formal screening of the finished film.
A year ago, amazingly, seems like a lifetime ago, on Veterans Day weekend, we premiered the film at the huge digital screen at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. We had a huge crowd, almost 400 people showed up, and we showed the finished film. And to see your work on a 100-foot screen in crystal clear sharpness and 5-channel sound is a religious moment. It was a religious moment for the three of us who had never really seen this on this big screen before that night. And it was amazing. And the response, and who joined us, like General Goot and David Hanna, who are in the film, and family members were there. Nick Rutgers was there, and Regis de Ramel, and
there on the right of the photograph is Captain Georges Tenot.
That's Captain Tenot. That's correct.
And the commander of the Lafayette Escadrille was Captain Georges Tenot.
That's right.
And his son was Georges Tenot, and his son was Georges Tenot III, who is a captain for American Airlines.
Yeah. So all these people came to see this premiere, and it was amazing. The response was great. There's the 100-foot screen, and all three of us felt that any screw-ups are going to be 100 feet wide, and we're going to be doomed. And there weren't any. We were, it was sort of overwhelming. You know, I think all of us felt kind of overwhelmed that there it was. And it was quite a weekend that we had. The museum the next day put on a seminar where they brought out artifacts that were not on display of the Lafayette Escadrille. And some of the family members were there, and we had quite a weekend, at which afterwards we were completely wiped out.
The film, however, wasn't completely done. I'm sorry to say that some of our special effects houses dropped the ball, and so they were incomplete and not really up to snuff. And Paul, the stickler that he is, wanted to redo the sound a bit and rescore it. So we got into the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, which is my hometown, which I've just moved back to the last 2 years. So I was very excited. We had about a month, and we redid the special effects. Paul re-edited the soundtrack. And so our official premiere at the Air Force Museum was sort of our gala opening. And this was our official premiere. Unfortunately, COVID hit. We had gotten into Kansas City Film Festival, and we were going to show it at the National World War I Museum, which is a beautiful place with another beautiful theater. But unfortunately, that festival in March or April, I think, was all virtual. So our film is almost ready to be released. We still need to make a DVD, and we're actually making a French language version of it. And we're shopping it around to PBS and to French distributors right now.
So that is where we are, and we'll leave you with this image at the Place États-Unis in Paris, the memorial to the American volunteers in World War I. So that's where we are right now. As Darroch said, we're in the process of doing what we need to do to get the film distributed. It's not quite the glamorous work of making the film, but there's a lot to do with insurance and legal things and getting clearances and rights for everything so that we can show it to the public. But as he mentioned, we're shopping it to PBS stations. We're in conversations with a few of them right now, and we're looking towards national distribution. We're in conversation with a French distributor at the moment who has expressed interest. And we really feel that at this time, having a story that tells about young Americans stepping up in a time of global crisis, stepping up for our oldest ally, France, about the long alliance between France and the United States, is a story that's going to resonate, especially as we are hopefully going to be coming out of emerging of this crisis. That what really counts is that people stand up for a cause larger than themselves. And so that's what we're hoping this message will be able to resonate. We would invite all of you to stay in touch with us. Please visit our website, the LafayetteEscadrille.org. You can see the teaser for the movie there, a little bit more information about it, so you can get in touch. There's ways for you to be involved, and we'd be delighted to be in touch with you. And right now, we would be delighted to take any questions you might have. And we thank you so much for your very kind attention. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Very much. We're very much appreciative.
So thank you to all of you. This has been a great presentation. Melissa, should we look at the chat? Melissa?
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Could you speak about the Air Museum in Windsor Locks in Connecticut? There's a part of the museum that is dedicated to the Lafayette Escadrille.
Yes, the New England Air Museum. We're quite familiar with it. I saw the Escadrille exhibit there when it was new some years back, and it was a very, very good exhibit. There's the Air Force Museum has a couple of their aircraft and some of their artifacts, but their story, which was once, commonly known, they were household names, certainly during the war and immediately after the war. In fact, it has been counted that there were almost 4,000 men who claimed to be members of the Lafayette Escadrille after the war. There were 38 total. So there you have it.
And you should just mention that there's a difference between the Lafayette Escadrille, which was an all-American squadron flying for France, and what became known as the Lafayette Flying Corps, which were all of the Americans, some 246, I believe, who flew with other French squadrons. But
Yes.
the Lafayette Escadrille was the only all-American squadron.
Yes, there were a lot of Americans who flew for France before the U.S. entered the war, but there was only one Lafayette Escadrille, one squadron. So, so that exhibit was there and up. That was a wonderful. They preceded us by some years in helping
Yeah.
to get this story out there, and the family members were very much aware of it. So it was a kind of a touchstone for us. Last time I saw it was actually last year in the exhibit. I think they were redoing it. It was kind of off in a corner, and it was a little bit quieter than what it had been before. At least the day that I visited it. But no, it was very good that they did that, and certainly when doing my research on it, the information they had online as we started to get our feet into the story and really understand it was very, very helpful.
Good. Can you also tell us about the memorial in France?
Well, I think the best person to speak about that would be General McPeak.
Indeed.
Well, the memorial is on the outskirts of Paris on the southwest side on the road to Versailles, and sort of halfway between Paris and Versailles. And that's not very far, but it is outside the normal arrondissement. If you go there, you'll see it's been restored. It is now an American monument, belongs to the American Battle Monument Commission. For many years, it was run by a private French foundation, but they didn't have the funds to keep it up, so we took it over and have now restored it. And you'll see that famous Indian head right in the middle of the memorial. Someone, maybe Paul, said it was a Seminole, and I think that's correct. But the Seminoles have competition. There are other Indian tribes that want credit for being that Indian. So one of them was the chief of one of the Sioux nations that came to the rededication and helped with some.
I can comment on that. The original Indian head was a Seminole, and then the squadron decided late in to change that to the Sioux head, which is the one that's on the mosaic in the center of the memorial. But it started out as a Seminole, became a Sioux, and at the memorial dedication, the Sioux chief, oh gosh, I can't remember his name.
Chief John Yellowbird Steele of the Oklahoma.
John Yellowbird Steele spoke at the rededication and was pretty demonstrative about how proud the Sioux Nation was to be the symbol.
Of course, now the U.S. Air Force doesn't have that symbol in any of its squadrons. That symbol has stayed with the French Air Force and still have the Indian head on the side of their airplane. So
exactly. It's
great. One other just comment while I got the floor is they did start in Newports. In fact, the squadron was N-124. The French used a system of naming or using the initial of the equipment than a number. So it was N-124. Later, when they upgraded or changed to SPADs, it became S-124. So just a funny little fact.
Yeah, that's right.
I'd like to add one note about the Indian head insignia. We have not found any reason why they called it a Seminole Indian head. William Thaw, they wanted to use an American flag, but the United States was not supposed to be flying in the war at that point, but they wanted their adversaries as well as their allies to understand who was up in the air. And William Thaw decided that an Indian head would be the most American warlike symbol he could think of. And there was an ammunition, Savage Arms supplied some of their bullets, and they had an Indian. I'm guessing Seminole, the name Seminole was chosen because they were the only tribe that never completely surrendered to the United States. However, the design as it came out, that is not a Seminole headdress at all. The Seminole did not wear headdresses like that. So two other pilots who came in 1917, both of them architects, redid the design. They thought, this isn't really war enough like. And so they redid the design, and they probably came up with deciding to call it Sioux, which were the most warlike of the Plains Indians.
Right.
Another question?
Oh, somebody missed the recipe for the Lafayette cocktail. Very simple, as they had it, half champagne, half cognac. But half champagne, half cognac will really knock you out.
You will go to sleep.
Indulge me. I have one more quote from Ted Parsons.
You'll die happy. So
yeah.
There you go.
Ted Parsons says, Visiting brass hats were our especial delight, for in order to maintain our reputation as perfect hosts, we presented unlimited quantities of the extremely dynamic Lafayette Cocktail on them. We were accustomed to it and knew when to quit, but after they had gotten over the shock of the first drink, there seemed to be no limit to their thirst until the inevitable result. We always had spare beds ready for emergencies.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I just add that the administration in Washington did not cover itself with glory in the first part of the story because they wanted to call it the American Escadrille. And that was turned down. So they had to improvise to find a hero, Lafayette, a hero of our revolution, to rename the squadron. But it was irritating to me that the politicians in Washington were such sissies that they wouldn't allow them to call it the Escadrille Américaine.
An interesting tidbit from the memorial rededication, after we were done with all the photographs, a fairly short woman came up dressed in red and introduced herself to us, that she was the descendant of the Marquis de Lafayette and came to the memorial dedication just for that. And I still have her card, and I just like those things, you think, wow, that is a completely in touch with the American Revolution. And here we were, and they came to see what was going on, and we were pretty amazed by that.
I saw a question that somebody asked if there was a sense in France about the importance of the Lafayette Escadrille. And yes, there was. Mm-hmm. And we made 2 trips over there, probably over 6 weeks. But Paul and I were having dinner one night in Paris, and a couple overheard that we were Americans and wanted to know why we were there. And we told them the story, and they knew all about it. And I don't think there was anybody that we came across, and we stayed in Airbnbs that did not know the story. And literally, it seemed that it had happened a year ago. The story was very fresh in their minds. It was a completely different experience for France from World War II. And so certainly all the pilots we met, I think the story was part of their training. And as Paul mentioned earlier, there were several memorials to the pilots along the Western Front in which we traveled. And there were always fresh flowers or nicely manicured gardens.
And they never knew we were coming. We had made arrangements for, interviews and things like that. But when we just went to shoot a marker, we just went and showed up. Nobody knew we were coming, and there it was. So it really spoke highly of how the story is remembered. And and certainly the French military pilots. And General McPeak, maybe you could speak to that a little bit, the relationship between the French and American Air Forces today.
Well, quite close, because their English is better than our French, quite frankly.
Well, that's
I mean, in NATO, English and French are supposed to have co-equal status, but as a practical matter, in my experience of 11 years in various NATO assignments, so everybody speaks English. Right. But I will say that on this importance of the memorial or the whole, just the squadron, I did the negotiation with the French government that got that monument to become American property. So that's 13 more acres of France that now belong to the United States that I negotiated, and my counterpart during that negotiation was the Minister of Defense. So, and he didn't send his number 2 man. We sat down and worked that deal out over lunch. So, I think it's very important to the French. It's a real touchstone between us and them. And that's important to us too. I mean, really, we have to keep that relationship as solid as we can.
Yes. Were you drinking wine over that lunch, General?
Absolutely, but we didn't get to the French 75 part of it, unhappily.
I don't know if I can be heard, but for a French woman who has lived in the US for quite a few years, but still attached to France. Your program was very touching, very interesting, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Mwah.
Thank you so
Sue.
much.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to seeing the movie.
Hopefully soon.
We're looking forward to you seeing it as well.
Yes, we are.
That's why we made it.
You better hurry because I'm getting old.
We'll hurry. We want it soon, as soon as possible.
Not the only one.
Yeah.
Well, do we have any more questions? I'm not sure we do. Melissa, I don't see any further questions.
Oh, Clay Howe.
Oh, there's Clay. Oh, where's Clay?
Oh, you need to unmute.
I am unmuted.
Okay.
There we are.
Here's
Hey,
Clay.
This has been one of the most fabulous presentations I've seen over the last 6 months. And I happen to have been in a demonstration on the 200th anniversary of the War of Independence. We won't call it the Revolution, which still is yet to take place. But there is an association that has members in Connecticut called Souvenir Français, and they put a flower, to the extent it's possible, on every Frenchman who died in our War of Independence. And there is a corresponding organization in France that every July 4th puts a rose on the tomb of every American who fell in France. And I think you're absolutely right to point out that in France, the American sacrifices are a big deal. And I have, through my wife, met a man who received a Hershey bar from a GI at the liberation of Paris and has kept it in his closet ever since. He didn't want to eat it. So no, they haven't forgotten us at all. And I don't think we should forget them.
Absolutely not.
Wow.
Amen.
Thank you. I'll give $100 for that Hershey bar.
I just saw the question. What is the timing of the French completion of your film? Actually, the first draft of the translation of our script of the narration to French has been done, and Darroch has been working with General Bastien for him to read over it and make sure we're getting all the aeronautical and military terms correct. And so that process is underway. So it's a question of, we've also been speaking with French distributors and producers, and the interest in France is for a 1-hour version of the film or 2 1-hour episodes. Our film is 2 hours long, and to turn it into 2 1-hour episodes. And they're very interested in, so talking to them about the balance of French narration and subtitles and so on. So we're in that process right now. So what is the timing? As soon as we possibly can. I wish I could be more definitive than that. I wish I could say, on July 4th or on Bastille Day, we're going to show that it's going to air in, I can't say that. None of us can say that right now, but we're working towards it as best as we can.
Run it as fast as we can.
Are we good?
Oh, you're muted, Renee.
Oh, I'm just unmuted now. So thank you to everybody, to Darroch and Paul and Dan and Melissa and the 70 people that joined, and especially to General McPhee. So this is McPhee. So this has been an incredible program, and I think that as a member of the board, of AFUSA, we're really waiting with bated breath to see a French version of this. As a producer of a French film festival, I'm waiting with bated breath to see the French version of this. So we'd like to thank you all so much for this very, very important explanation of your film, and to remind everybody that the 20-minute version is available to look at. If you happen to miss it before you watch the program, it is available on YouTube, and maybe we can send it out again, or you can look back at your invitation. We'll figure out a way, or go to the website. Paul and Darroch, you can see it on the website, correct?
Though you can get a link to the 20-minute film on the website. You can see our trailer there. You can get in touch with us.
And
Please do
I'd
get in
just like
touch.
to mention, Renee, that we did that a year and a half ago, and it was commissioned by the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission for distribution in American high schools. Yeah, we like it, but it doesn't have special effects. It doesn't have the full score that our final 2-hour film does.
Of course, but for those people that didn't have a chance to watch that prior to your discussion, it's revelatory in its own right. So
It's a great teaser for the full film.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you all so much.
thank you
This was
all,
great.
and have a wonderful and
fun.
safe holiday
Happy
season.
to be a part of your evening. Thank you so much.
Au revoir.
Thank you.
Real pleasure. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Christmas.
Merry
Thank you
Christmas,
so
y'all.
Bonjour.
Oh, wow.
Bonjour, Merry Christmas. Salut.
Salut.